Hello, everyone. My name is Courtney Lewis, and I am the Content Director with the KC Chamber. It's 3:02, so we are going to start. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we officially begin, I want to go over some basic housekeeping items. Your audio and video will remain off today's webinar. That helps to lower the bandwidth so we don't freeze or jump during the presentations. Also, we'll have time for Q&A. We will do that through the chat portion, so we ask that you submit your questions via the chat function. I also want to take a brief minute to take this time to tell you about tomorrow's webinar at 10 a.m. that you might find very interesting and highly timely. The certainties and the uncertainties of the economies of today webinar at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Frank Lank of the Mid-America Regional Council and Chris Keel of Armada Corporate Intelligence. We'll discuss the current KC regional, national, and global economies. Of course, it's highly anticipated topic as we see millions of more Americans file for unemployment, just released in those numbers today. You could register for that at kcchamber.com. Now for today's webinar, this is meant to offer resources and information to help parents and caregivers caring for kids and teens struggling with behavioral and mental health. Education of our young Kansas Cityans is important to the KC Chamber, and we know sound mental health resources are key for education of all ages. KVC Hospitals is a chamber member that provides support to families, children, and educators when it comes to navigating increased stress and difficulties, particularly when it comes to navigating increased stress and difficulties during this COVID-19 crisis. Please welcome today's presenters, James Roberson, Executive Director, KVC Hospitals, Kansas City, and Sara Schlagel, Director of Program and Staff Development, KVC Hospitals. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much for having us. We just want to welcome everyone who's participating in the webinar, and just know that we are so grateful to be able to share resources and provide information that is useful and that you can put into practice in your own homes. So with that, I will pass the baton over to James.
Yeah, and I would agree too. I mean, this is such a great opportunity for us to share information about, when we think about child development and we think about mental health, and then we connect that with COVID. I mean, I think just like you, I have 3 young children at home. I know Sara has 1. And so this is such a great opportunity for us to share what we know from a mental health standpoint. And if there's anything that we can do within the community to give more information to relieve people's anxieties, then we are extremely glad to do it. And I was talking before everybody jumped on. I've done other work with the Chamber, so I've always been impressed with the health initiatives. And the Chamber was one of the very first groups years ago to support trauma-based work for children in the Kansas City area. And there are very few chambers of commerce that are as involved in mental health and childhood trauma topics as the Kansas City Chamber is. So definitely excited to be here and excited to share what we can. Sara and I both, for the bandwidth issue, will be turning our cameras off. We wanted them to be on so you could see our face for a little bit. But we should be ready to jump in. Okay, so our talk today, the first place I want to start is with the science. And so Sara and I working in mental health, we're both therapists by training. Our jobs have led us into many other projects. I do a lot of administrative work. Sara does a lot of our consultation and outreach work. But we are therapists at heart. And when we think about mental health, whether it's in the context of the family or in the school or the community level, or even in all 3 of those contexts in this new COVID-19 world that we're all experiencing, I want to start and make sure we go back to the basics of the science of childhood, the science of child development and mental health. And that will help us as we get into topics later and we discuss some of the tools that we would recommend for families to be able to handle this. Because a lot of what we do, and I heard a comedian say not too long ago, and it resonates with me really well. He was joking, but he said, if you put everything you know in one column, and then you put a second column next to that, and you put, how do I know that? you would be surprised how much of that is like, well, I heard one time, or my grandma once told me, or I was watching TV or read something on Facebook. And so now I'm sure that that's true and that's a fact. We deal with that with parents a lot because our society doesn't do really good at communicating science to the general masses about how mental health works, how child development works, and what are those triggers or interventions that are most effective to support that. And so our first, we use these metaphors, and you'll see these cards that we're posting on this PowerPoint, but we also use these and hand them out to parents when we're engaging in treatment to say, hey, we need you to understand what science we're working from so that we have a common language. And so our first one is around brain development. And anytime we're talking about childhood or mental health, we as clinicians are often looking back to say, okay, let's look at how the brain developed for the first few years through childhood, adolescence, and even into early adulthood. And that will tell us a lot about lifelong functioning and wellness. And so when we think about brain development, we always say that the brain's not born, it's built. And so we are working under an understanding now that the brain is born with very few neurons connected, and that every second of every day that a baby into toddlerhood, into childhood, every little interaction throughout every single day is critically important to how that brain develops. And so we use this metaphor of, it's like a house. And so it's built from the ground up. And anytime there's a little bit of disruption in childhood, we're often able to dig in and figure out, okay, how did stress impact the brain and the skills that should have been developed during that time period? And then that's what guides us as clinicians to say, okay, in therapy, I'm going to focus on this. Because we see that there are skills that can be developed that maybe weren't developed because of a variety of reasons, whether it's biological or social or environmental, or, for instance, a significant loss of a family member during a very critical time period tells us a lot about what skills we should focus on. So in the context of COVID, as we go into this world and everybody is starting to shut down, research and studies are going to tell us more in the future than what we know now. But we have to take into consideration post-COVID, when we're doing mental health assessments, we're going to have to very critically look during this time period and talk about how did this impact development. And for some kids, it's going to be great because they're going to get more contact with their families than they ever had. But then for some kids, it's not going to be so great because they're not getting their natural social supports. If they were getting mental health services in schools, they're not getting that. This time period could create a lot of issues with food and economics for parents. And so we know moving forward that as that brain is developing and moving from, very few connections to billions of connections, this time period is going to be critically important for us to take into consideration. Okay, so when the brain is developing, and we teach all of our kids this in our inpatient psychiatric facilities, as well as residential, as well as our day treatment and school-based programs. We want every youth and family to walk away having a basic understanding of the brain. So as that brain is developing from, again, very few connections to billions of connections, that development is occurring in various parts of the brain. And so the three essential parts, the first one is the brainstem, which is our basic brain functioning, right? Reminding individuals, children, families that, nothing happens in our body on accident. Our brain has to be developed and have and be very healthy to tell our body how to manage our metabolism, our hormones, or even things as basic as how quick we breathe. Your brain tells your lungs to expand and contract, expand and contract. And that occurs in the brainstem. The limbic system, which is in the inside middle part of the brain, is the part of our brain that is responsible for memory. And then it's also the emotional center of our brain. So when we talk about kids struggling with mental health in any context, whether it's at home or school, it's often we're talking about that limbic system. And so it's usually about emotional control, anger control, being able to accept no for an answer, um, and or kids that are dealing with depression or sadness or anxiety. And we'll talk about some of that in a little bit, but often that occurs in that limbic system. And then it's really important to note that the limbic system is different than the frontal lobe. So especially as caregivers and or providers, teachers, often what we're asking kids to do and do well occurs in the frontal lobe. So we want kids to problem solve. We want them to stay focused. We want them to learn their math and their reading. We want them to be able to put their experiences into words. And that occurs, it's really important to note as we move through this, that occurs in a different part of the brain than the limbic system. And usually what we're focused on is saying, let's keep that frontal lobe intact. Let's keep it working so that the limbic system, the emotions, and the brain don't overtake our ability to engage on a day-to-day basis. And when we're working with kids, we'll talk about some of the tools, but we try to target that so that they know we're teaching you this to be able to manage your amygdala. And then we're going to switch over and we're going to teach you this for problem solving. And if you are experiencing a lot of anxiety or worry, don't be mad at yourself. Don't put yourself down because you're having a hard time completing your math homework. The problem is we got to focus on managing that stress and that worry, and then the math homework will come. And that helps us take away some of there's so much shame for kids when they're not able to engage in complete tasks that others assume they should be able to do. And this helps us break that down a little bit. So our last slide on brain development is just to really drive this topic home. And in that, where we started and we talked about the brain, very few connections to billions of connections. This image shows the purple in this would be fully developed and matured part of the brains. And then the red would be full unmatured. And so even if you look at the 5-year-old brain, you can see all these different areas that have not been developed. And so again, imagine that kid, every interaction every day with every person in their life, whether it's mom, dad, grandma, guy down the street, teachers, it turns it from red to purple. And so any time period in there, often what we're looking for and what I talked about earlier is we're saying, are there specific skills that we need to train a youth on so that they can make up development? But it's really important I have a 6-year-old at home, I need to look at her every day knowing, okay, that brain is not fully developed. And if she's upset or throwing a tantrum, I need to understand, okay, I'm not working with an adult here. I have, I have work to do to help her develop those skills.
All right. So all that information that James provided is key to understanding how is this period we're going through with COVID-19 or coronavirus, how is that affecting our mental health? And what are some things that steps we need to take in order to make sure that we're staying on top of our own mental health needs and those of our children and family members? So one of the things that we first suggest when we are considering your mental health during this time is being aware of how you are doing. I think everyone would agree that this time in our life has been very challenging. Our life has been uprooted and turned over. And even amidst all of those things, we're trying to be the best parents we can be. Everyone on this call is on here because they want to do what they can do to help their children, their peers, their family members, and their friends. And that in itself is huge. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone understands that we're all human and that there needs to not be any super parents here right now. And so that first step is really just checking in with yourself and being real. There is no shame in recognizing the fact that you may be struggling yourself. Most of us have never experienced anything like this in our lifetime, and it's significant. and we're not any less of a person because of how it's affecting you. And so first and foremost, we need to recognize that that during this time, we have to put on our mask before we put on the mask of others. So just like if you're taking a flight from one place to the other and the flight attendant tells you what you need to do in case of a water landing, we have to take care of ourselves. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to be there to support others. All right, so after we've focused on paying attention to how we are doing and how our loved ones are doing, we need to focus on what those actual warning signs are, right? So there are many, and it's important for us to understand that each person is unique, and we may experience one of these signs, or we may experience all of them. It just depends on the individual person. So some of those warning signs are increased anxiousness, sadness, anger, aggression. You may experience, or your children may experience extreme mood changes, feeling hopeless, excessive crying or irritation, fatigue or reduced energy, which I think surprises a lot of people, right? Because as growing numbers of individuals are working from home or staying at home, they may or may not have a better opportunity to get more sleep. But even with that opportunity, we may be fatigued and just not have the energy to do the things that we were doing before. Somebody may experience unexplained headaches or body pain. We'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, but your body really provides you some key clues as to how you're feeling. I can know from personal experience that I've had to learn over the years to pay attention to my body and not just push through and continue moving forward with some of the goals that I have. Changes in sleep and eating habits, including that as either sleeping too much or eating too little. All of those things are very normal. It definitely happens in my house as well. I find myself laying in bed for 30 minutes until I'm actually able to fall asleep. So I have to use some additional coping skills or some relaxation skills to get me to where I need to be. And so all of these things are very normal. You may have difficulties paying attention or concentrating. Maybe you're forgetful or you're easily distracted. You may actually withdraw from family or friends, right? And so that doesn't really matter. It's not discriminatory whether you are naturally an extrovert or an introvert. Withdrawing from friends and families is a normal reaction to a time like this. Avoiding activities you enjoyed in the past. You may see your children being more irritable and have some acting out behaviors. And obviously those behaviors are going to be different based on the age level or age of your child. But we have to be conscious that those behaviors are happening there's an underlying reason behind them. It's not just because your children find the opportunity to act out and that's what they're going to do. In a way, they're communicating their own anxiety and frustrations. Something else too to note is that some of our children are going to return to some outgrown behaviors. So some of our children who maybe haven't wet the bed in several months or a year are now wetting the bed, or we have children who need to be rocked to sleep. That's very normal to have a regression in behaviors during the time when we're experienced heightened stress and tension. Some of the other things that you can see are dangerous behaviors or actions that can lead to self-harm or harming others. Use of alcohol, tobacco, or other drugs to really cope with what's going on and the emotions they're feeling, or even poor school performance or avoiding that online schoolwork. This list is not exhaustive, so it means that there are a lot of other warning signs that are out there, but we're hoping that if you just have, if you're able to grasp the generality of the different areas, that you'll know, have a better idea of what to look for. All right, so what can we do to actually proactively manage our stress and our anxiety? These are a few tips that you can do. First and foremost, getting outside. I can't tell you how much I've actually noticed how many spring flowers there are this season. And it really helped me just become more mindful of the world around me, right? So get outside, go kick a ball around, garden, take a walk, or just sit outside. It's amazing the therapeutic helpfulness that nature can really provide you. Take care of your body. So do your best to eat healthy meals, move, there's so many gyms and individuals putting up YouTube videos that give you exercise routines. There's a lot of resources out there right now. Get enough sleep and really try to be attuned to what your body is telling you that it needs. Set a routine. Kids especially need a routine to stick with, right? So it doesn't matter if part of that routine is getting up by 10 a.m. What matters is that you have a routine and that you know what to expect at what time of the day. So it can be just a modification of what you were doing before. But children need and crave limits, boundaries, and as a family, it's important to know that you have a goal for that day. It helps create that purpose. Stay connected. I believe that this is a common theme from many places that have tried to provide tips on how to manage your mental health during this time. But whatever you need to do to stay connected, whether that is text messages, social media, or even sending letters, all of those things are going to help you feel connected to another person and are extremely important during this time of social distancing. One word of advice is be careful with social media. I can say from personal experience, if I stay on social media for extended periods of time and I just see post after post on news updates in my community and how many cases there are, how many deaths there have been, you can really easily get sucked into that. And it's hard to kind of break free from that and be able to refocus to something more positive or stay in tune with your family. Make sure that you express yourself. So this is, there are many ways that you can express yourself, right? This isn't just, not just talking to a trusted person. Encouraging yourself and your children to have a journal, write out what they're feeling, or even maybe paint. Right? You may be the next Picasso and you had no idea, nor did the world know. So this is an opportunity for you to think outside the box and express yourself in ways that you haven't before. Fact check what you hear. Visit those trusted sites, right? There is a lot of misinformation out there that can cause a lot of confusion and unnecessary stress. So check out the World Health Organization or the CDC websites for some of that concrete information. Set realistic expectations for yourself and your family. So remember what I said before, you don't need to be super parent right now, right? You want to set yourself up for success and have realistic expectations. I know personally, when I had my son, I was literally, I had him, I was getting ready to leave the hospital, so I started making a list of all these things I was going to get done on maternity leave, and boy, was I ignorant. I had never had a child. It was obvious, and I had all these goals that I wanted to achieve, and as soon as I got home, reality slapped me in the face, and I was like, okay, that's not going to happen, and that's okay. And so I just want to, talking parent to parent or caregiver to caregiver, for everyone to give themselves a little grace and understand that don't set yourself up for to let yourself down or to be disappointed. Practice compassion. So when we talk about that, we all should understand that everyone is going to adapt differently to this time. Every experience is going to be a little bit different. Whether a child is 4 years old or 14 years old, they're going to have vastly different concepts of what's actually going on in the world, and they're going to have just different experiences and consequences from what's happening. Last but not least is talk to a therapist. Obviously via telehealth, but seeking help, there is no shame in just having somebody else to talk to in a professional way that can help you find ways to express yourself, can help you find and identify coping skills that you can use to help you cope during this time. So let's talk a little bit about how to talk to your child during and about COVID-19. So there's several tips and things to take in consideration. So first and foremost is be present. Just full transparency, I can say for myself is I have a hard time trying to not multitask. And so the best thing that you can do right now is when you're talking to your child is be completely present with them. Put your phone away, put it on the side, find a special corner where you're able to sit down with your child and really be present. Allow your child to guide the conversation. So as parents, we make assumptions many times on what we think that our child wants or needs to know, or we may try to come up with solutions, right, to problems that we haven't even heard yet. And so the best thing you can do is let your child guide the conversation so you know exactly what their concerns are and then know how to address them. Next, you need to keep things simple, right? We tend to, as human beings, can over-explain things and can provide extra details that are maybe not necessary, or repeat things that we've heard on the news, but it's just not at the same developmental level as our children. So keeping things as simple as possible is going to assure that your child is really able to understand what you're saying. Don't overshare. Is another key point. So like I mentioned previously, it's natural for us to really dive deep into details and to talk more and more about a topic, but it's not necessarily helpful when we're talking to when we're talking to our children. So answer questions that are posed to you, but try to keep back that urge to give more information than what was requested. Last on here is also give your child the opportunity to talk through their feelings and even process how coronavirus has changed his or her daily life, right? So it's an opportunity. These conversations that you have with your children are really a check-in time to see how they're doing, the feelings that they're experiencing, and then help them process how their life is different. Sometimes our children need to have some prompts in those areas to help really understand what's happening to them. So again, a few other tips for talking to your child about COVID-19 is a lot of times I think the frustration that adults and children have is not having control right now. We're being told to stay home. We're being told to practice social distancing. And so that puts a lot of limitations to what we can do. And so that feeling of lack of control can be really disrupting to our lives. And so reminding children what they can control helps empower them and help them focus on what we actually can do right here and right now. And this is a really good opportunity to empower them to do their part in preventing the spread of coronavirus. So that whether that's washing their hands or making sure that they're 6 feet away from another person, but giving them tangible things that they can do is going to help them feel reassured. Encourage positive coping methods. This is something that we're going to be talking a little bit more in detail here later in the presentation, but it's important for us to know that we're creatures of habit, and we will automatically start to cope with something in a way we've done as a habit, right? And so those coping methods may or may not be considered healthy coping methods. And so this is your opportunity as a parent to provide children with options and to really encourage those positive expressions of emotions. Last but not least is stay attuned to your child's needs, right? So we're talking physical needs, emotional needs, and social needs. And how do we do that? We talk with them. right? We're present with them. We watch them, right? You know your child better than anyone else. And so you're going to know if they're acting a little bit differently or if they're choosing to not do some of the activities that they did before. So remind yourself to do those frequent check-ins, but at the same time, try not to overdo it, right? All right, so just some developmental considerations when you're talking to your child about COVID-19. So different age groups are going to require different supports, and we have different suggestions based on ages. So if we're considering children's ages 4 and younger, it's important for us to understand that children in this age range are too young to understand what's happening in the world right now. But they can very astutely feel that there's a change in the environment. They know that they're not getting to leave the house like they were. They know that they're not seeing their friends at daycare or at school. They can feel and sense a difference there. And so what we can do is keep the focus on doing fun things, creating moments of laughter and happiness and sharing that with them. You can do simple things with them, just like we talked previously, teaching them about hand washing and germs, doing arts and crafts, or again, like we mentioned, following a routine and schedule similar to what they had in daycare or in school is going to be really helpful for that group. Children ages 5 to 10, children this age are likely to have a little bit more of an idea about what's happening, but too much detail given to them can make the whole situation really difficult to understand. So it's especially important with this age group not to overshare, right? The best thing we can do is really validate their feelings, help them identify someone to talk to besides you, right? So you and whomever else. Try to help them by setting up scheduled phone time with grandparents or other extended family members or friends, using FaceTime, Skype, Zoom, whatever. There's lots of different options out there in the community. Sharing stories of times when you were in hard situations and how you coped with them can be really, really helpful for children because it helps put that in perspective and helps them know that they're not alone in kind of working through their emotions during this time. And do what you can as a parent to take their minds off of the stress of the moment. Again, like we mentioned previously, is doing fun things with them and really giving them family options to do together. And lastly, focus on increasing the things that you can do between family members specifically. That may be board games, that may be playing a game of soccer out in the backyard, but it's a really good opportunity for you to share between family members and really increase those positive family interactions. Ages 11 and up. So these are our teenagers. These are maybe arguably one of the hardest hit age groups of children, right? With these teenagers, they may be having some serious worries or frustrations. It's a really difficult time for them because at this point in their life, friends are some of the most important connections that they have with the outside world. Their need to socialize with one another is higher than than other age groups. And they're missing out on things such as prom and graduations and parties and ball games, and we can go on, right? So it's really hard. So it's important for you to really proactively check in with these youth often. Acknowledge their emotions, even if some of the things that they're upset about seem silly to you. It's a true, valid emotion that they're feeling, so make sure to really validate that. Reminding them that this period will pass, it just depending on the child may or may not be comforting, but saying that will help in general give them an understanding that this time will not last forever. Encouraging extended family members to check in whenever possible, and engage the youth by doing activities of their choice. that could be video games or like we mentioned, any activity that your child chooses, sharing that with them is going to be really comforting.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So we're going to finish up our discussion today, and I want us to talk a little bit about stress, and then we're going to talk about resilience and what builds resilience. And so with everything that we've talked about and putting it in context of COVID and how we engage kids, you know, during those conversations, all those wonderful things that Sara is asking for you to do, and things are going to come up, right? So as a parent or a teacher, or anyone interacting with a kid, you have to assess as they're giving you feedback. You're going to be assessing, okay, what is this experience like for them? And then what do I do? What are the recommendations? I mean, what if the stress is too high? And we use this term toxic stress as being the highest level of stress. And so for us on the mental health side, if we see periods of toxic stress, and the toxic word is very intentional, because what we're saying is that the stress is so bad that it's actually causing some kind of physical and mental impairment. And so on our next slide, you'll see that we have, when we talk about stress and when we evaluate stress, we look at it in 3 different ways. And so, again, this is even new, enlightening for us in this COVID world, as we start to look at this and we put it in the same frame. So with stress, there are positive stressors out there. And a positive stressor would be the things that you think of every day, like my child doesn't want to take a bath, and I have to make them take a bath. That stresses them out. But then ultimately they're able to cope with it, and they learn how to deal with that demand. They take their bath, and then hopefully they grow up as an adult and they take baths, you know, pretty frequently. The other kind is manageable stress. And manageable stress is a little bit different. It's not positive by any means, but it is definitely part of the human condition. And COVID might end up falling into this category for a lot of us. It's something that's not really good. It would be better if it never happened, but it does happen. And then we have the resources and supports in our life to help us manage it. Where stress becomes dangerous is when it goes from manageable to toxic. And so toxic stress would be the type of stress in that, again, it's not good. We could do without it. It'd be great if we never had to deal with it. But it also comes with the context that I don't have the resources or the skills myself to manage it. And so why toxic stress is so impactful, and you can see on the slide, if you think of stress from like a speedometer, once it gets into that toxic level, it's not just mental health that we have to worry about. Like our actual body, the stress response system kicks in to fight and battle all of that stress. And when that happens, our heart rate goes up, cortisol levels in the brain go up, adrenaline goes up. And so multiple parts and systems in the body are all enacted to manage that. And on the mental health side, on the brain development side, it would be best for us if nobody ever had to experience toxic stress. And that all stress was positive, and if it had to happen, was manageable. But often what we see as mental health providers is that when that stress gets to a toxic level, then that's where we want to look at the warning signs that Sara talked about. So you might see that the kid experiences stress, they manage it, stress level goes down. We would look at that and say, okay, that's pretty manageable. But if you see those warning signs and you see them over and over again and the child's not able to manage it, and you feel as a parent that you're not sure how to do it or what the right way to do it is, then that's where we would say, okay, let's take another step. Let's look at something else. And so often we get asked, okay, how do I support? What am I looking for? I'm seeing the warning signs. At what point do I get help? What I would love is if everybody, and it would be great for me if every parent would take their child, participate in family therapy for at least 2 to 3 months early on, so that the parent can understand what to watch for, what to do, and when to deal with it. Often what we're doing in mental health during those first couple of sessions is just providing some basic, what we call psychoeducation, so that we're all using the same language. And so one of the ways I explain to parents on stress levels, when to do what, is based on what are you seeing. And so a stress response could look like all three of these areas. And so the red would be, it's really inadequate. Like there are situations where my child should be stressed, and they just don't seem to get stressed out by it. And of my 3 kids, I have one who has a very avoidant personality. And so what I am always monitoring is, okay, is he responding or engaging to the level that he should be? And sometimes not responding can be just as negative as over responding. And so we always say, if you see that your child's not engaging, and it occurs over and over again, then we need to be looking at seeking out some professional services. Look at things like depressive symptoms, look at things like developmental issues, make sure that the child is able to identify, evaluate, and know when they're experiencing stress or not. And then the next one would be, this is what we call kind of our typical stress response, and this is where manageable stress fits in. So we see the stress go up, and then pretty immediately we can see the stress go down. And so often what we'll tell parents in that situation is just reinforce that. Definitely don't push your kids to say, well, you never should have gotten upset anyway, because what the brain is doing as they experience stress and manage it, the brain is developing healthy coping to be able to manage it. And then over time, that stress will go up less and less and less. And so that's a pretty healthy pattern. The one when we talk about behavioral issues or mental health issues, mental illness, it's often in this area, which is our children experience stress, and then the things that we think should work to help them manage it just aren't working. And it's not always like a personality type, or I've had a kid who's never managed stress well. We will see this just out of nowhere sometimes, where the child seemed to be very happy, and then as they mature and as they grow, their ability to manage stress seems, at least from the caregiver, that it's getting worse and worse. And so don't feel bad or overthink it, but if you see that your child is experiencing high levels of stress, they're not able to manage it, the things that used to work or that you believe should work aren't working, then we would say, okay, focus on self-regulation skills, focus on all those great coping skills that Sara mentioned. And then if it is prolonged, then that's when you would want to seek professional services. And then I would always say, when I say seek professional services, don't feel bad. It's not like your whole world has to change because you engage in mental health. We have a lot of families that engage for a short period of time, moderate, long periods of time. And it often is just about, okay, tell me exactly what's going on, give me some guidance, give me a roadmap, and then we can move forward as a family in making sure we're doing things that are going to work and that we're not working against ourselves. Okay, so the big term is resilience. And if you experience stress in your life and you're able to cope with it, then the really simple definition we say is that you have resilience, that you're a resilient person. The Webster Dictionary definition is just the capacity to bounce back. And so to expand on that, in one of the metaphors we use to educate families and adults that are working with kids, is that if we think of resilience like a scale, on one side we have all the adversity and stress and trauma that occurs, or just painful emotions and behaviors and experiences. And then on the other side, we have all of these skills and positive interactions with adults. And what we want is for one to outweigh the other. And so the reason this is really important for adults is that we get caught up in this, we're looking at a kid and we think, there's got, I think something's wrong. I need to label that something wrong. And again, so then I know what to do with it. And the resilience scale reminds us that it's not one thing and it's not a label, right? So, I mean, even in doing therapy, a diagnosis is a great way to describe a problem. But usually after you get to a diagnosis, I just set that off to the side and then start working with the family on what they're experiencing. What does their world look like? What can we do to build those resilience skills? And so in that, kind of scale approach, we can always add to the side to outweigh the impact of the adversity. And so if we're experiencing like COVID, that could tip our scale, towards that adversity and trauma. So then all those things Sara talked about, and she's going to share a few more tools, they're all designed to tip it back. And because kids aren't in school right now, and I know my kids, when they go to school, they get, their counselor teaches them about healthy brain development and how to manage. They get so many great interactions with adults in their school. We are now, as parents, responsible for that. And so every time you do one of the things Sara mentioned, or you just have a good day, or you teach them a little bit about what they're experiencing, or you practice some self-regulation skills, even if it seems minor, you're working to constantly just outweigh the impact of the stress. And if we think about that as caregivers, it can be really helpful to say, okay, am I putting weight on the stress and adversity side, or am I putting weight on the resilience side? And we can always put stuff on the resilience side. Every opportunity you have, you can put a little bit more weight, and then that'll outweigh the impact of the stress. And then I think Sara, so these are a few tools, and it's 3:48, so we'll pay attention to time. But these are a few tools that we do use universally with all the kids that we serve, because we feel like everything that we've talked about today, it gets us out in front of that, and then it gives us language that we can use so that we can keep coming back to it as we teach new lessons.
Right, yeah, thank you, James. So one of the best things we can do during this time is to develop an emotion regulation safety plan for our children, as well as ourselves, right? So there's 3 main steps to developing a safety plan. And step 1 is identifying some of those triggers that we may have. So triggers can be anything that's going to elicit an emotional response from us. It could be listening to the news. It could be just the unknown, or seeing others not practicing some of those safe social distancing measures that we're all supposed to be partaking in. Step 2 is, once we identify some of those things that elicit emotional response from us, is identifying what are the emotions that I'm actually feeling when that happens, right? That's going to increase that self-awareness, that understanding what's really going on with you. When you're able to figure that step out, then we can talk about what are some things we can do that are going to help make us feel safe, or help us cope with the emotions that we're experiencing. So at KVC, we focus on, with all of our children and with our employees as well, is identifying safe people, safe places, and safe activities that you can do when you're experiencing some of those overwhelming emotions. And those people, obviously, during this time when we're having to spend a lot of our time at home, we want to make sure that whatever we put in as those safety items that we have, that it's available to us. So you want to encourage your children to select people that we know that they can readily talk to, identifying places within your home or on your property that they can go to help calm down, or what activities that they can do safely at this time. A safety plan is as easy as pulling out a piece of paper and writing down step 1, 2, and 3, right? Just as important as writing it down is making sure that it's visible, having it on your fridge, or putting it in your room, in your child's room, so they can see it, reviewing it. So as we experience different emotions throughout the day and throughout the weeks now, your safety plan may change. Your triggers may change. Your emotions may have morphed into something different. So you want to review it and change it as needed. And just being conscious of time, like James reminded us, I'm going to go a little bit quicker through some of these resources, but again, super important. So body regulation activities are some of the most important activities that we can practice right now. And when we talk about body regulation, we're talking about doing mindfulness exercises, deep breathing, participating in progressive muscle relaxation, and even yoga. Though participating in those activities are going to help promote being aware of your body, relaxation, really being able to manage some of your stress that you're experiencing and being present in the moment, right? It's important for us to be realistic and understand that not all of us handle stress the best way we should. To be honest, when I am overwhelmed, sometimes I stress eat, I binge on Netflix, or maybe I avoid some difficult situations. And so what I know that I have to do is include some sort of a body regulation activity in my daily routine so I can proactively manage my stress instead of waiting until I feel overwhelmed by it. Another aspect and tool of what we focus on in providing the children and families we serve is focusing on emotion regulation. So ways that we can identify and regulate our emotions, first and foremost, is body awareness. So we mentioned that a little bit already, but paying attention to our breathing or our heart rate or the level of physical stress that we feel. A lot of times I would realize how stressed out I was when I was driving. I would take a moment, a cognitive break, I guess you could say, and I would pay attention to how tight was I holding that steering wheel. And I would surprise myself. I felt like I was okay, but obviously there's something going on right now that I need to take a breath and try to relax a little bit. Identifying emotion and creating awareness within that. So identifying the emotion that you're actually feeling at the time, and then doing a sort of an evaluation of when do you feel that and how do you express it. If I am anxious and worried, a lot of times I take that out on some of the people closest to me, and I don't mean to, but if I don't proactively address that, it's going to be expressed in a way that's not helpful to yourself or to others. Another way to deal with with excessive emotions is avoiding things or walking away, taking a moment to yourself so you can calm your emotions and then come back to the present situation. Engaging in relaxation techniques, like we previously mentioned, deep breathing or pleasant imagery. So thinking about positive things right now, imagining you're on the beach, imagining you are at your favorite concert and you're just feeling the energy. Looking into your options, right? So problem solving, using some of the values and morals that you hold dear to help inform what you can do right now instead of maybe having a more reactive response to the emotions you're feeling. And then also, when we talk about emotion regulation, we focus a lot on being able to understand our past experiences and how that can help prepare us to how we can respond in the future. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. Some additional skills that we use to help promote emotion regulation are emotion regulation drills. These focus on emotion awareness, emotion identification, being aware of our body, relaxation, creativity, and that pleasant imagery. And so as you can see here on the PowerPoint, there's several different activities that we promote our clients and our children to utilize to cope with those emotions and to really form some of those more positive habits and more positive expression of emotions. All right, so our next slide focuses on our emotion regulation map. So what we know when children are experiencing intense emotions, it's important for us to have a roadmap to what they need to do when they are feeling overwhelmed. And this is also used as a tool to help guide caregivers and at KVC, our employees, and how to help a child work through that situation that they're going through. So that first step there is identifying emotions. So understanding, where did these emotions come from? What's really triggering myself to feel what I'm feeling? Moving on into your safety plan. So utilizing that safety plan as a resource to manage my emotions, so I get myself to a safe place where then I'm able to talk about responsibility. So I've had an upsetting event. I use my safety plan to calm down, and then I talk about, what do I need to do now? And then number 4 is reflecting. So what am I going to do next time? So the child's upset because their brother called them a name. I can identify my trigger, my emotion, use my safety plan to calm down, then talk about, what do I need to do now and what I'm going to do next time if my brother calls me a name again. Okay, and so then one of the other tools that we use at KVC is focused on executive functioning. And so just to give a very brief definition of what we mean by executive functioning, so that is a group of complex mental processes and cognitive abilities that control the skills required for goal-oriented behavior. So to translate that is that we use executive thinking skills and build those up. So executive thinking skills are people's ability to problem solve or focus or follow directions, maybe plan or make good decisions, right? And so we know that, like we talked about the brain being like a house before, when we struggle managing our emotions and that limbic system or that amygdala is really overactive, we're not able to use that frontal lobe to make sound decisions or to be able to plan ahead of time. And so when that happens, we try to provide the opportunities to build the brain back, right? Because the brain can change and that changes everything. So we facilitate activities that help to promote problem solving, controlling impulses, and memory building. Things that you can do at home are playing memory games, doing some creative storytelling, puzzles, or even team or family related competitions. If you want to know more information about executive functioning, KVC Hospitals is actually going to be publishing a blog on that on Saturday. So you'll have access to that as well. James, you want to take over here?
Sure. So we have 1 minute. So if you want to click on to the, so we do a lot of what we've explained to you in our, what we call the Resilience Center, which is where we're trying to put that scale into reality. And so each of the areas that Sara mentioned, we have small labs. So the kid might go to the regulation lab, the emotion regulation, body regulation lab, emotion regulation lab, executive function lab. And then within that, we use the similar curriculum to what Sara's been sharing. And then we have additional tools to teach kids. But there's also a lot of cool stuff on virtual reality, like mindfulness and meditation apps and different problem solving apps and art and expressive therapy options that we use. And then we also use neuro and biofeedback, which is a little bit more of a professional. It's not something you just buy off the shelf. But the focus of that is connecting kids with their brain and it teaches them, the computer teaches them when their stress levels go up and then when their focus levels go up and how to use that to counterbalance so that they can keep that frontal lobe enacted, manage the stress and the emotions, which has a lot of really great evidence to show that it's effective. And then the last thing you guys may have already seen, because I know Sesame Street and Communities has done work in Kansas City, Missouri, and they're now doing work in Kansas City, Kansas. But I wanted Sara to show you a quick, Sesame Street has a great website if you're parents of younger children or you work with younger children. Everything that we have mentioned, there is a Sesame Street version out there. And we use them on our pediatric programs every single day. We use the Resilience Toolkit with every single pediatric patient that we see and teaching them about self-regulation and resilience in managing their bodies. Okay, so 4:01, that's not too bad for us. We could probably talk for another 7 hours, but We will stop at this point. Again, I appreciate everybody's time. We do have time for questions, but if you guys are limited, we can cut it off. So I'll pass
Hey
it
guys,
up.
this is Courtney with the Chamber. If we want to spend a couple of minutes, about 5 minutes doing questions, we can do that definitely.
Okay, we're available. So yeah.
And I don't see that any questions have popped up. I don't know if you've seen anything, James.
So one thing I would add, Sara mentioned the blog coming out on Saturday. And so at kvchospitals.org, we have about 3 years of blogs now that talk through this, and you can kind of see and very different, you know, specific for parents, specific for patients, specific for schools. And you can see some of the information we've shared expanded.
Right. Well, last call for questions. It doesn't seem that we have any questions that have posted yet.
Hey, James and Sara, if our attendees have questions but just need to get off to something else, are there emails or ways they can contact you to follow up with anything they may have seen here?
Yes, of course. They can contact, and I'll send the chat to this group, and you can add me as a resource here. But my email address is sschlegel@kvc.org. So any questions can be emailed to me, and then I will respond. Happy to respond.
Great, thank you. This is a good time for us to wrap up. James and Sara, thank you so much. This was excellent, and I feel like an hour is just touching the surface for what we've been talking.
Right.
Thanks to everyone who's attended, and don't forget that you can go back and watch this webinar. We'll be posting this on our KC Chamber Knowledge Hub on our website, so look for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yes, thank you very much. And definitely stay safe, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you.